You are listening to The Central Cast, a podcast for mystics and misfits just like you, recorded every week in Pasadena, California, before a live audience. Thanks for tuning in. All right. As we head into the holidays, I know a lot of us are going to be seeing family and friends that we're not used to seeing very often, and those family and friends may be of more of a conservative perspective on things, perhaps, when it comes down to faith and politics. And those interactions and times together can be strained and strenuous and difficult. And the question I want to address today is, how do we navigate those waters at this time of year and not strangle those people over the Thanksgiving table or poison their eggnog or something? Something that I've learned that has helped me find some compassion and grace for such folks is this. Not everyone has the personality, psychology, and even brain physiology to be someone who critically examines their closest held beliefs, to question why they believe what they believe, to peel back those layers and adopt new ways of looking at the world. It's really hard to do that, actually. Is it not? It takes a certain kind of personality and psychology to be able to do that. And the fact is, not all of us are built that way and capable of doing that. We like to assume that all of us are equally as capable of practicing critical self-reflection and have the same capacity for philosophical and higher thinking, higher complex thinking, or have the same capacity for empathy and compassion. But something that I've realized is that not all of us do. Recent studies show, especially one done at Ohio State University in 2023, shows that the brains of liberals and conservatives actually work differently. When thinking about moral, social, and political issues, liberals and progressives have greater activity in their prefrontal cortex than conservatives do. The prefrontal cortex is where empathy and higher complex thinking takes place, whereas conservatives show greater activity in their amygdala when considering moral, political, and social issues. The amygdala is also called our lizard brain. Perhaps you've heard that term before, because it's the location most associated with dealing with threats and fears and anxieties. Where if we're thinking primarily out of our amygdala, we're in flight or what they call it, fight or flight mode. We're looking at the world in terms of threat management. Folks who think a lot out of their amygdala crave certainty and are prone to black and white thinking. They tend not to like uncertainty and ambiguity. They tend to value allegiance to authority over truth-seeking and questioning things. They tend to crave strict social hierarchies that keep them and people who look and live like them safe and secure and at the top of the social ladder. They tend to be xenophobic and overly suspicious of people from different walks of life, because such people constitute a perceived threat. Therefore, they're drawn to political and religious groups that tend to be authoritarian and insular. This should come as no surprise, right? And I think it explains a lot. It explains why it's so hard, if not impossible, to debate with such folks, to get them to expand their thinking, to take into consideration how they're harming others unjustly who are black or brown or gay or from a different religion or from a different country. Have you ever been in an argument or a debate with someone like this and felt like it's like trying to explain calculus to a 5-year-old? Yeah, more is often going on there than just normal biased thinking and stubbornness. Such a person often really does process information differently, and they literally look at the world differently than you do. Their brain works differently. They tend to think more out of their amygdala when it comes down to social, moral, political issues than their prefrontal cortex like we do. Now, as a quick aside, I just want to point out that we can all over-identify sometimes with whatever our closest held beliefs are, to the degree that when someone challenges or disagrees with us, it can feel like a personal attack. I know I feel that way sometimes because it's such a natural human thing to do, to ground our identity or our ego in our beliefs or our opinions about things, such that it can feel like a personal attack when someone comes along and challenges those beliefs and those opinions. And as a result, it can be hard to think clearly or objectively in those moments. And we can even sometimes become the mirror image of that other person, like the conservative or the fundamentalist we might be in a conversation with. The trick is not to ground our identity and our ego in our beliefs, in a set of beliefs or in a particular tribal identity, like Christian or post-Christian or atheist or theist or Democrat or independent or whatever, but rather I want to encourage us to ground our identity in higher things like love and compassion, truth-seeking, curiosity about others and the world. To be clear, it's great to have identities. We got to have identities. It's great to say things like, well, I'm a Christian, or I'm post-Christian, or I'm an independent, I'm a Democrat, whatever. That's fine. The trick is not to overly identify and ground our ego in such things so that we can remain open and curious and approach different ideas playfully and enjoy exploring. This strikes me as more of a healthy way to be, right? But here's the thing. I can only say such things today and think this way, probably because of the way that my brain works, because of the kind of personality and psychology I was born with, and how I'm probably predisposed to being more on the liberal and progressive end of things, even though I didn't grow up that way, I ended up that way, right? Like you did, like so many of you did. This is probably has to do with my personality and my psychology that I was born with. The brain chemistry, the physiology, the wiring up here. And this also explains why I deconstructed, I think, and why so many of you deconstructed. Certainly environment matters, who you meet, who you hang out with, okay, that matters. But I think what might matter more than anything else is the personality, psychology, and brain physiology that you were born with. I don't know about you, but when I look back on my childhood, my adolescence, my early adulthood, I can point to the fact that I've always been a truth seeker. I've always been geared towards philosophy and truth seeking, and always been really curious and wanted to hear other points of view and take those other points of view seriously, even though, yeah, I grew up evangelical and very conservative, like so many of you did. And I was a conservative. I was a fundamentalist, right? But I was always open to hearing other points of view. And I was always geared towards truth seeking. That's just who I was. I've always had this kind of philosophical, instinct, call it. So I deconstructed, not just because I moved to LA, contrary to what my family believes. Aaron moved to Los Angeles and became a liberal because, LA is a liberal bubble. Fine. Environment matters, right? But I started deconstruction in Nashville, Tennessee, in the buckle of the Bible Belt at an evangelical university as a Bible major. That's where it really started for me. Had nothing to do with being in a liberal environment, really. It's because of who I was. It's because the way my personality was since I was born, since I was a kid, my psychology, my brain chemistry. I think this is true for most of us. And it's why you're here. You are the kind of person who is attracted to a crazy little community like this one that has Semler and Peter Rollins and, all this heresy, I guess we would say. But we're also here because we're feelers. Because we're in touch with that prefrontal cortex and think a lot out of that prefrontal cortex where empathy and compassion emanates from. It's those with a strong capacity for empathy and compassion that are attracted to communities like this one that are invested in things like social justice and talking about liberation from the liberation of the oppressed and what that looks like in our social context. Maybe the best way to describe us, I think, is to call us empathetic intellectuals. I don't know, I like that term, empathetic intellectuals. But the point is, we're built differently than a lot of our family members, are we not? I feel that way. We're built differently than others. And because so, I think we can have compassion for them. That's really what I wanted to get us back to talking about here. For me, this has become sort of a source of compassion in my relationships with my immediate family members who just don't get me anymore. I think it's because they can't get me to some degree. They are a product of their brain chemistry, just like I am. And so to a certain extent, I can pray, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Right? These are, of course, Jesus' words from the cross that we're told he prayed for his crucifiers. And this is actually a fascinating thing to find in this ancient text. Here we find at the heart of Christianity, in this ancient text, this recognition of the unconscious self. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. What is this about? Well, this is this recognition that we are not the free will actors that we think we are. We are all products of our environment in ways that we cannot name, that we cannot fully describe. We are products of the culture we are immersed in and grew up in. We are products of this brain chemistry we were born with. We don't know why we do what we do half the time. I have a hard enough time understanding my own intent and motivations half the time, to say nothing of understanding the intents and motivations in the hidden inner life of the person sitting next to me. They're a mystery to themselves. We are strangers to ourselves, are we not? Who fully understands why they do what they do and think what they think from one moment to the next? No one. We are a mystery unto ourselves. We are an enigma. Now, those of us who are capable of acknowledging that and embracing that, and even in some ways celebrating it, and allowing that to move us towards a compassionate understanding of others, yeah, we tend to be liberal, progressive. We do. That's some deep water. That's where the adults swim in the pool, in the deep end, to understand such things about the human condition. Those nasty Roman soldiers who hung Jesus there, Jesus understood they don't really know what they're doing because they're products of the culture they grew up in. They are products of the Roman imperial cult, even, I guess. The Roman Empire was a cult. But that deep understanding of the human psyche can be a source of great compassion for us and others. It can liberate us from the tyranny of hate and anger. It can liberate us from the tyranny of hate and anger and help us live more out of love and understanding, especially for those whose brains do not work the way ours do, whose personality and psychology just can't get to where we're at. And to be clear, this doesn't excuse their bad behavior or justify it in any way, but it does mean that we can see them not as monsters, perhaps, but as limited human beings. I like that. They're limited human beings, just like we all are in different ways. They're not monsters. They're limited human beings caught up in a system. And I want to finish today with the meditation that Jason shared with us the other week. I really like this. I was thinking about this when I was working on my talk this week, and I have found myself even meditating on it some. And I think it can not only help us live more out of a place of love and compassion for others, but I think it also can bring us peace and serenity during these very, very strenuous or contentious and stressful times. And the meditation goes like this: May I be free from suffering. May I be free from ill will. May I be filled with loving kindness. And may I be truly happy. And then, as Jason shared, we can turn that outwards and extend that outwards towards others, beyond ourselves, and say it like a little prayer for them, which I love. Maybe for those in our life who drive us insane, like our family. For me, it's often my brother Nathan. And so I might pray, may Nathan be free from suffering. May Nathan be free from ill will. May Nathan be filled with loving kindness. May Nathan be truly happy. And with that, I just want to open it up for discussion. What does this bring up for you? What are the strategies maybe or the perspectives you've found that work for you in negotiating these waters with difficult or different family and friends back east? You know, I remember when I went home a few weeks ago in October for that family wedding and stayed at my sister's, it felt like going back in time, stepping into an alien world, but a world I used to live in, but it still felt very alien. I don't know. I'm going to Portland next week for Thanksgiving, where I'm going to be around moderates, not really conservatives. But anyway, what does this topic bring up for you today, if anything? Mm-hmm.
A lot of times with divorce, one person tends to do better than the other.
Yeah.
And they recover differently and they go on to live their lives differently. And my mom, I think, has been more successful in her, she remarried. My dad has become, I think, a little bit more socially isolated. He's kind of gone down the internet rabbit hole. And he was always like kind of a center left leaning person.
Yeah.
Very socially liberal, actually. But as of like COVID onward, sometime during the Trump first administration, he's like MAGA now. And
Wow.
it's been a big adjustment for me to like recalibrate, because I have all these hopes and feelings that maybe this is just like a phase.
Right.
And this just might be who he is now. And I'm just dealing with that. And it's been very difficult. And so, yeah, I sympathize with your situation with your brother. It's got to be very painful and it's challenging, because I have moments where it's like, do I continue this relationship? How do I hold on to this? Because I have to protect myself.
Yeah.
And I have to not go crazy, and I don't want to be insulted and berated over the phone,
Wow. Yeah.
So it's tough. It's tough. But then we'll have a conversation. It's like totally normal and everything's fine.
Right.
And it's like, but it'll switch on a dime if it goes political. And I try to steer away from it, but he like insists on, I think that's like all he has to talk about sometimes. And so that's part one of what I want to say. The other thing I want to say is, and this is maybe to kind of challenge a little bit, I don't know if I believe all this, what I'm saying, but I'm going to just to push back.
Sure. Yeah.
Is this whole idea of, I don't know, if I was just to try to practice some empathy, if I was a conservative person walking in here, I think I would feel quite condescended to.
Yeah.
With what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a limited person. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Who are you? Why are you?
Right.
You're morally superior. But yes, I agree in some ways.
Yeah.
You are. But
Thank you.
But you're welcome. But also, I was listening to this lecture by Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you're familiar, but
Jonathan who?
Haidt, I think it's, yeah. So sociologist.
Everyone else is aware of this person but me.
He kind of popped up.
All foundations.
Yeah.
Moral. Thank you. Moral foundations. Thank you.
So he gives this lecture on like conservatism and liberalism and like how do we think of it? And typically we think of it as defined by a pretty narrow set of political positions on like really hotly contested issues, like what you think about guns or abortion or immigration, like that.
Climate change. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what a liberal or conservative is based on what your responses are to those questions. And yeah, it is, but it's obviously a lot more than that. And like what undergirds those positions, really. And what you were talking about kind of reminded me of it, because he talks about conservatism being, and it was a little bit more generous, I think, than your characterization, which is at the core of it, it is prioritizing your individual responsibility and you want your neighborhood, you want to know all your neighbors, and like you're very skeptical if anything different it comes in, but you just like things to be predictable, and you like things to have a structure and be organized, and you're really concerned about protection and you want to protect yourself. And then liberals is like openness to experience, a comfortability with a certain level of unpredictability, wanting to work with different people, taking a certain amount of risks, and either thing to the extreme can be, you don't want to be too comfortable with the risk to the point where you're like reckless and like people are being
Yeah, that
harmed.
makes sense. Yeah.
But then also, you don't want to be totally sequestered off from
Right,
society
right,
and you're
right.
like a crazy person in a bunker somewhere. That's like the extreme end of it. So it's like, are there certain strands of both things that you can have? And some people's minds just are more calibrated one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I do think there is an environmental component as well to it. I think that you are always kind of at your core the person you are, like you said, but like living in a city probably contributed to it to some degree,
Mm.
I would suspect. But anyway, I've rambled long enough. So,
No, that's cool. No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
so
Those are interesting thoughts. Somebody want to react to that or have thoughts of their own? Jason.
Yeah. For me, it's like a yes and to what you said. And I think what's valuable is recognizing that, well, let me say the yes part is like, I think of like John Fetterman or like her uncle who had like a stroke or heart issues or surgery or whatever and came out of it with totally different opposite mindset
Wow.
about their politics, right? Like Fetterman used to be much more liberal than he is now.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe physiologically there's something there. You maybe part of your brain stops working or you lean more into a certain part. But I think the valuable thing here for me is not so much, these people are need medication so much as you can see how they're coming from a point of fight, flight, fear, anger.
Yeah.
And so whenever they're making these points, like my dad, when he makes these points about, oh, your kids are going to get demon possessed or whatever,
He
well,
cares.
it's, yeah, it's coming out of a fear place, right? Like he's scared of that stuff. He's scared of that stuff happening. It's in his mind all the time, right? And so I think it's helpful to look at it from, okay, you're terrified about, going to hell, or you're angry about missed opportunities that you would think are because of another group of people who took it from you or prevented you from being successful in what you wanted or whatever. And so the politics, it's not for a lot of people. I don't know about some people. I think there are evil people in the world, but for a lot of people, it's not as much about hate as it is about fear and anger, and being against a certain group or a cultural phenomenon or whatever is a lot more about dealing with those feelings.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it necessarily helps make the Thanksgiving conversations any easier, but
Just don't have.
there's room for compassion and empathy
Yeah.
there. I was reading about, it's like this little paragraph in a book I was reading about how there's some Buddhist sutta where the bodhisattvas, the Buddha people, are laughing about everybody because it's so obvious that we are kind, joyful, loving people, and all these ignorant people that are just paying attention to their ignorance and their projections about life. And like, why can't they just see what's going on? That it's almost funny. I assume I'm not a
Mm.
bodhisattva,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like once you can see that there's all these people chasing these illusions, that it's silly. It becomes
Mm.
it's like it's a silly thing, and I think that breeds compassion. It's like, I don't know, silly
Yeah.
person, you can't help it.
Yeah.
But I love you for it.
Yeah. No, thanks, Jason. I I think going to seminary and seeing how people come out of seminary differently is a really great social experiment as to how people's brains work. Because all the classes I went to and my fellow classmates went to, we all heard the same things, but I processed that information really differently because I heard, oh, Moses didn't write the Pentateuch. Oh, all these letters from Paul are pseudepigraphical. He didn't write these. Somebody wrote in his name. Oh, none of the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses? oh, boom, 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 boom. I heard that in Deconstructed because I just followed the trail where it led because that's the kind of brain I have. I have this predilection, whatever you want to call it, towards truth seeking. Whereas numerous classmates of mine who all went into ministry went into evangelical conservative churches, they heard the same stuff, got good grades, just like I did, but they processed that information totally differently or just didn't process it. They didn't process. They said, nope, can't do that. I need certainty, blah, 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 et cetera. For me, seminary is like a perfect social experiment that demonstrates the way that different brains process things differently. And so when I look at like my sister, my brother, friends back east who are still like, they live in Chicago, they live in like a blue city, but they're fundamentalists, they're Pentecostals, they're just, that's the way they've always been. And there's nothing that's going to change them because that's who they are fundamentally up here. And is there overlap? Does this explain everything? No, but I've just really become convinced people are just born differently and we look at the world differently forever because that's just how we were born. That's how our personality developed. That's our psychology. That's how our prefrontal cortex and amygdala work. And it just, you know what I mean? And so again, for me, I just feel like that's become more of a source of compassion rather than superiority. Like, oh, I'm so much better than you. But as Dan pointed out, like, does that make us morally superior? I'll be honest. Yeah, I think often it does. I think it actually does because we're living now in MAGA land and watching fascism rise because of the way certain people's brains work and their inability to think outside of themselves and outside of their communities and embrace the other and think empathetically and compassionately and non-tribally, and are bound up in superstition and bullshit and lies and conspiratorial thinking and all of this psychotic magical thinking that they live in and refuse to acknowledge that's what they're doing. And they're like addicts. And we know that addiction is passed down through hereditary and it's biological and it's pathological. And I think it's not just possible to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, but addicted to modes of thinking that feed your sense of certainty and power and et cetera. So are we, is it morally superior to be empathetic? Yeah, I think, or to be open-minded? And yeah, I think so. Jason, the other Jason.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I went on a tangent there maybe, but go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
To stick with what Paul was saying about the moral foundations theory, Jonathan Haidt, and kind of what you're saying, different ways of thinking about the same things. I struggle with this because my family has become increasingly conservative, and I was raised by like basically a single mother who had handicaps, and my younger brother had handicaps, so she was largely helped by her sisters and her mother. And so I was raised by many of these folks in my family. So I have an extra sensitivity when we're faced with these things where I'm like, I come from you. How could I be so different from you?
Yeah.
From a values standpoint,
Yeah.
how could we be so different now?
Right.
It continues to boggle my mind. So in my mental processing of these things especially the last few years, coming from a place of most people are good. Setting aside the problem of evil, most folks are good and trying to do their best and to live according to some degree of principles.
Yeah.
And that I think that progressives, my little tale I tell myself is that progressives are like, hey, here's these problems, we need to work on them. And conservatives are like, we shouldn't have had these problems in the first place if everyone would just behave and do what they're supposed to do. And they're both kind of right, and working through that, though, we should be compromising. And then I can get off into other political theory. But, I try to go back to that when I'm trying to put myself in folks' other shoes and be empathic. And the other thing I do, just for, slight bit of humor, is I do allow myself to work through the dark fantasy of throwing the turkey at my aunt at Christmas so that I don't actually do it in person.
Yeah.
So thank you for letting me confess that.
Yes. Yeah, you have absolution, my brother. Yes.
That was good. I wanted to just quick comment on something you just said. Is it morally superior? And you're like, yeah, but based on your premise, you can't really take credit for it either.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So
Right.
I find that in my interactions with people, like I'm not a joiner in the sense of like I rarely identify myself as I'm a liberal or I love that team or I'm, I'm so even my Christianity, like I'll say I'm a Christian, but I always qualify it, of course, these days. I'm not so, I don't like to identify myself with a team, so to speak. And I've always been that way.
Yeah.
And in line with that, like, I think there was something that you said early in your talk, and I can't remember the exact thing, but it reminded me of the idea that when we identify as liberal, Democrat, conservative, Republican, independent, or whatever, it flattens everything.
Yeah.
Like everybody thinks they know everything about you because they know that one thing. And so if you're that, then that means you're this,
Right.
this, and this. And it's probably part of why I don't like to do it.
Yeah.
And so in line with that, when I have interactions with people I have a good friend who's fully MAGA, down the rabbit hole. We've come to terms with we should not discuss this because there are other things that both of us deeply, deeply value about each other.
Yeah.
This is a person who knows things in my life that 5 people in the entire world know, very, very close friend. And but the reason I can do that is not because I'm just pretending to ignore, like, oh, if we just don't talk about that. And he's like, if we don't talk about that, then we can get along.
Yeah.
It's not just that. It's because I don't want to flatten him to this one thing about him that is very important, but if I only focus on that, I lose the fact that he's individually, because there's also this dichotomy between who we are individually sometimes and who we are systemically.
Yes.
Like how we vote is very disconnected sometimes with how people actually behave in real life.
Yes.
And while I think it's really important how you vote, and it does say a lot about you.
Yeah.
At the same time, like in this relationship that I'm talking about, this is a person who's very compassionate, who's very generous, who's very kind, who's very loving. That is seen by other people around us who I know he's a conservative Christian, know about his politics, know about all of those things, and despise that part of him, and still adore him because of who he is as a person. And
Yeah.
so it's connected to what you were saying about, like I want to identify myself and I want to identify other people based on their actual values.
Yeah.
So his values don't align with this cult he has aligned
Right.
with. And I don't understand how that cognitive dissonance can live in his head because I can't tolerate that in me.
Yeah.
That's why I
Because you're different.
deconstructed. Exactly.
Exactly.
And it's 100% true. That's 100% true, I think. I think what his psychology needs is certainty and something solid to hold on to that he feels is right.
Right.
And that's how he participates in certain aspects of his life. And then in other aspects of his life, there's this other part. And it's not that I want to like pretend like, oh, those other things don't matter because he's a really good person over here. But when I'm there are other people who have been in my life who have the same political bent as him, but they are destructive in relationships. And I don't continue relationship with those people. And so, I know that's a very vague way to approach it in some ways, but I think that's part of what I'm able to do because I'm able to live with uncertainty and this nuance and all of that. I don't have to have somebody align with me on every political ideal
Right.
in order to see good in them.
Right.
And so it's very nuanced.
It's extremely nuanced. And, anytime I present something like this, there's always the danger of hearing me, speak in vast generalities and painting with a wide brush and not wanting, or the perception could be, I'm just being very black and white. This person's like that. This person's like this. And no, obviously not, but are there tendencies? Are there certain ways that people actually are and that they tend to think this way and others tend to think, yeah, I think absolutely. And that Ohio State study in 2023 and others, I think scientifically have demonstrated that liberal minds tend to process more out of the prefrontal cortex. Liberal progressives tend to think more out of this part of the brain. Conservative, traditionalist, fundamentalist, tend to think more out of this part of their brain. I think there's science behind that. Does that mean that it defines everything about who you are? No, of course not. And I think what you said about how people behave individually and systemically is really, really interesting, because we all know really empathetic, loving people who are triple Trumpers, voted for him 3 times. They go to the evangelical community church in the town that is not affirming, not egalitarian, whatever.
But they have gay family
But they
members
have
that
gay
do that.
family members. And I'll tell you a quick little story. At my nephew's wedding, my 70-year-old neighbor that I knew growing up, who was good friends with her boys growing up, was there. Aunt Mare, I called her. She said, I follow you on Facebook. She's a diehard evangelical. I follow you on Facebook, and, I love Dan. Dan is a gay boy that we grew up with, that we're also in contact. I love Dan and I support him and his husband. I hope you don't think of me the way you think of most evangelicals. And I was just like, it was really sweet. But she's that perfect contradiction where she loves me despite the fact that I have left the fold, and loves Dan despite the fact that he's gay. But she's still part of that world that's so violent and oppressive and destructive for everybody other than them. And what do you do with that?
No.
She's a loving person. She's a lovely person, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use the N-word, Nazi. Okay. Yeah. No. Oh gosh.
We're all like, what?
No, I was just thinking of you because you told me this story before. Oh, yeah. Thank you. But there's this idea that the best Nazis, Max, you said this story, were not really the diehard Nazis, but just the average German who went along to get along, and didn't like seeing their neighbors dragged away, didn't like seeing the Jews brutalized. They weren't for that. They weren't all for that, but they just turned a blind eye to it.
Right.
So, I mean,
it's hard.
It's hard, but we got to be clear about moral categories here. I feel like I want to be clear about moral categories, and I want to be compassionate for those who are different than me from the conservative world that I grew up in too. I want to balance these things. I want us to be healthy and balance these things and think about the complexities. No, it's a really great conversation. You can go on forever. Anybody else have anything they want to add today before we conclude? Oh, Jose and Anna. Okay, cool.
I mean, just going along with what you said about your neighbor. I had an ex, my most recent ex, and it was the same thing where she grew up in a conservative family, went to a conservative non-denominational church, found a slightly more progressive one, has progressive leanings, but it's still that same thing of where there's certain mentalities that she couldn't break out of.
Yeah.
And it was exactly like you said about seminary, where it's her and I, we saw things exactly the same, but where I saw deconstruction and it made me question when I saw what you learn about the Bible, it made me deconstruct and question things. She saw it and it was no, that's scary to think about. I'm going to stick to what I know. And so that was what we always butted heads about. And she had the saying that I think in her mind was empathetic and was kind, but that was one of the things that we always clashed about, where she would say, when talking about members of the LGBTQ community and how her family viewed it, she's like, I always tell my family, love the sinner, not the sin. And I remember the day that we broke up, this was a thing that came up.
Wow.
And I told her, I was like, you say that and you think you're being kind, but that's not really kind, because you might be saying love the sinner, not the sin, but you still believe they're a sinner.
Yeah.
So how compassionate is it for you to be like, you're gay and I love you, despite the fact that I disagree with that. And I love you, but deep down you're still thinking, but I still think you're going to go to hell.
Right.
I still think you're going to be punished. I still think you're doing something wrong. And so it is, I mean, it's nuanced, right? But I think that is just a really interesting thing of like, I remember it's hard to like, cause I don't think she took it the right way, but I just told her that I was like, I think that's something that you have to stop and look at yourself and be like,
Yeah.
wait, am I actually doing them a favor by saying this? Am I actually an ally or supportive by saying this? No. Right. And that was like a thing that I had to, cause I grew up in conservative Utah amongst Mormons.
Yeah.
And I'm in a somewhat conservative Catholic church. And so like, yeah, growing up, I held these beliefs because that's what I heard around me. It's an echo chamber. Right. And then once I left the bubble, it's all of a sudden like, I had to look at myself and think that too, where I was like, why is being gay a sin? Why would I think that? It's not right, obviously, but I think it's people are products of their environments. I do think that people are born, like I do agree with what you said, where people are born with these like physiological tendencies.
Yeah.
I think there's a really gray area where I think some people can move from thinking with a lizard brain to the prefrontal cortex, but it's a really hard transition because you're rewiring your brain chemistry. And I think it's like, how do you handle your family members at home when you talk about these things? I think it's like, it's like you're picking up rice with chopsticks, and it's like you're doing operation is what it is. You have to be careful not to hit the sides, because it's like, if you tell them like, well, you're wrong for thinking this, they're gonna be like, no, but it's more like, well, you believe this, right? This is what we also believe. See how we can find that middle ground. And it's like, maybe we don't vilify each other as much as you think, but it also, I don't know the right answer. It's really complicated.
Oh, I think you said it beautifully. Thank you. That was really good. Yeah. Anna.
It's really just echoing what most people have said, or many people have said. I do kind of grapple with the nature v nurture. Obviously, both are highly important and, go into making a person. I'd be curious with this, because this Ohio State study, like that's out there now, but like thinking back, I would like to see studies like children versus now. Because when did I have a liberal brain, as you put it, or a liberal mind when I was 5, but I was raised in conservative evangelicalism. Like, I don't know, maybe when I was 5, I did have the lizard brain, and that's what I was born with.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Maybe it was the liberal, and it flowered later. But I guess one hope is that, not that all of our MAGA family is going to be changed, but I think more and more studies do show like the brain can be rewired, and people coming out of cults, or you working through trauma, or, just general unlearning happens. So I don't know if it's something that we're born with and then will always shift, or maybe we're all born the same and then some are just more stagnant or dormant and it's unlocked later. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see that same Ohio State study, but like comparing the same people as children versus adults, and whether they've stayed the same or whether they've changed politically, socially, and like what part of their brain they're thinking.
Somebody had to have done that study too. Maybe that one did it. I didn't read it in depth, but no, it's a really interesting question. Good stuff. Well, all right. Great conversation. Thanks for being here, everybody. Let us conclude with a benediction, please. Let's say this together now. As we go from this place, we commit ourselves to the path of love, honesty, and humility. We dedicate ourselves, as Christ did, to the cause of justice and the courageous embrace of this life, this world, and each other. Amen. Thanks to all of you who joined us online, who listened to the podcast later. Before I forget, I just want to mention, next weekend, there is no parking out here on Fair Oaks. There's like an art fair at Central Park next weekend. You can park at the schoolhouse lot or the unified lot, but all the parking out here will be closed, Fair Oaks, next weekend. Okay, everybody? And then afterwards, maybe we can go to the art fair. I don't know. Thanks for being here. Yes, I'm listening. Thanks for listening in on this week's edition of the Central Cast. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.